It had been nearly 6 months since I'd last seen Jason. He'd moved back to town after finishing graduate school, and his mother, my sister, Ellen, kept telling me I should go see him. "He misses you," she said over the phone one Sunday. "He's grown up, Mary. You'll be surprised." So that Saturday, I baked my usual lemon loaf and drove across town to his new apartment. The leaves had just started to turn, that golden shimmer before the chill really sets in. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when the air feels like a memory of something you can't quite name. Jason's apartment was small but tidy. Books lined the walls, the faint smell of cedar and coffee filling the air. He greeted me with that same crooked grin he had since he was a boy, only now there was something else behind it. Confidence, maybe, or distance. "Aunt Mary," he said, pulling me into a hug that lingered just a second longer than I expected. "You look great." I laughed it off. "You always say that when you want something." "Maybe I just mean it." He smiled, and I noticed for the first time how much he looked like his father, the same gray-green eyes, the same careful way of standing, as if holding back a thought. We sat down, and I poured the coffee I'd brought from the bakery on Main Street. We talked about work, about my garden, about his new job at the university. It felt easy, until it didn't. Somewhere between the laughter and the pauses, I realized he was studying me. Not in a strange way, but with a quiet curiosity that made me uneasy. "You ever think about how time sneaks up on you?" he asked suddenly, his voice softer. "One day you're a kid running around someone's backyard, and then suddenly you're the one offering coffee and advice." I smiled faintly. "That's how it goes. One blink, and you're on the other side of it." He nodded. Then, without warning, he leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you ever regret not having kids of your own?" The question hit harder than I expected. For a second, I couldn't answer. It wasn't rude. It was honest. But it was also personal, and hearing it from him, well, it caught me off guard. "I used to," I said finally. "Sometimes I still do. But life had other plans. And besides, I've had plenty of people to care for." "Your mother, you—" I trailed off, noticing how his gaze softened. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he reached for my hand, gently, as if to reassure me that he hadn't meant to hurt me. His hand was warm, his thumb brushing the back of mine before he pulled away. "Sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to make it heavy. Sometimes I wonder how you became so good at understanding people. It's like you see right through them." I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "That's just what happens when you've been around long enough. People stop surprising you." But as I said it, I realized that wasn't true. Because in that moment, sitting across from my grown nephew in the soft afternoon light, I felt something stir that I hadn't felt in years, the uneasy awareness of connection. Not romantic, not forbidden, just deeply human. Two people meeting each other honestly, without the masks of age or family roles. The kettle hissed faintly from the kitchen. I stood to refill our cups, my hands trembling just enough for me to notice. When I turned back, Jason was still watching me, that same thoughtful expression, quiet and unreadable. And for the first time, I wondered what else he might ask before the day was over. The rest of that afternoon unfolded in slow motion, the kind of day where every sound feels a little louder. Every glance lasts a little longer than it should. The rain started not long after I'd poured our second cup of coffee. It came quietly at first, a whisper against the window, then grew steadier, softening the world outside into a gray blur. Jason moved to the couch, gesturing for me to sit beside him. He'd always been so open, even as a child, but now there was something almost deliberate in the way he invited me into his space. I told myself it was just closeness, family comfort. Still, when I sat down, I felt the warmth of his knee brushing against mine, and I became suddenly aware of the space between us, or rather, how little of it there was. You know, he said after a pause, I used to think adults had everything figured out, like you all knew exactly what you were doing. I smiled faintly, staring at the rim of my mug. That's the great secret of adulthood. We don't. We just learn how to pretend. He chuckled. Then you're a good pretender. Maybe too good, I admitted, glancing at him. Sometimes I think I've spent half my life pretending I wasn't lonely. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I wasn't sure why I said it. Maybe because the rain had made everything feel more intimate. Maybe because it felt safe to say things I never said out loud. Jason didn't flinch. He looked at me like he was listening for something beneath the words. Is that why you stopped dating? He asked quietly. I exhaled a slow breath, letting out a small laugh that wasn't really laughter. Partly. After a while, it just didn't feel worth it. I got comfortable with my own company. He leaned back, nodding, his eyes still on me. You deserve more than comfortable. The comment hung in the air, tender but heavy. I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. Not discomfort, not desire, just the ache of being seen. We changed the subject after that, or at least we tried to. He told me stories from his new job, about the students who reminded him of his younger self, full of questions and confidence. I listened, half smiling, but part of me was elsewhere. His voice had deepened since I'd last heard it, often calm and deliberate. Every time he laughed, I caught myself remembering the little boy who used to run barefoot through my backyard, chasing fireflies. Now he was sitting beside me, a man with the same spark in his eyes, but something wiser, quieter beneath it. As the hours passed, the light began to fade, the room filled with the amber glow of a single lamp. I noticed the rain had stopped, replaced by the faint hum of cars in the distance. Jason stood and stretched, then looked over at me. Do you want to stay for dinner? I was just going to make something simple. I hesitated. I should have said no. But the truth was, I didn't want the moment to end. Sure, I said softly. What are we having? He grinned. Whatever you can teach me to cook. I'm still a disaster in the kitchen. We ended up standing side by side at the counter, chopping vegetables, laughing at his clumsy attempts to slice onions without crying. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the air, wrapping us in something homely and familiar. Every so often, our arms brushed, and I'd feel that same tiny spark of awareness again. Not inappropriate, not confusing, just real. The kind of closeness that comes from two people who trust each other completely. When we finally sat down to eat, there was a comfortable silence between us. I looked across the table and realized how much I'd missed this. Connection, conversation, the simple act of being seen and heard. Thank you for coming today, he said quietly as we finished our meal. I didn't realize how much I needed it. Me neither, I said, meaning it more than I expected. After dinner, he walked me to my car. The pavement was still damp, reflecting the streetlights in little golden pools. I turned to hug him goodbye, and he held me, firm, steady, warm. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of hug that lingers because neither person wants to be the first to let go. When he finally did, he looked at me with a small, thoughtful smile. Can I ask you something else next time you visit? I smiled back. Depends on the question. He laughed softly. Fair enough. As I drove home, the image of his face in that dim light stayed with me. There was nothing improper in what had happened, just a surprising tenderness, a moment of emotional honesty I hadn't expected. But still, as I turned into my driveway, I couldn't help thinking, whatever he was going to ask next time, it was going to change something. The week after my visit with Jason, I found myself replaying that afternoon in my mind more than I expected. The question he'd asked, the one about regret, kept surfacing, not as a worry or a complaint, but as a quiet echo I couldn't shake. I realized I hadn't thought about those feelings so openly in years, and now, in a strange way, talking to him had stirred something dormant inside me, a mixture of longing, reflection, and anticipation. When Saturday rolled around again, I found myself tidying my house almost compulsively. The lemon loaf was ready, wrapped in parchment paper like before, and I packed a thermos of coffee. I told myself I was being meticulous because I wanted to make a good impression, but deep down I knew it was more than that. I wanted the comfort of routine, the laughter and familiarity, but also the quiet connection that had left me thinking long after I'd driven home last time. Jason opened the door before I could even knock. He had that same crooked grin, but there was something lighter in his eyes, like he'd been waiting for me, just as I had been waiting for him. "Mary," he said, and this time the hug lasted just a heartbeat longer than the usual. I felt the warmth of him close, the faint scent of cedar still lingering on his coat. "Come in, come in. I started a pot of coffee already." We settled into the living room again, the same soft light spilling through the curtains. Outside, the sky was pale blue, the kind that promises calm weather, but there was a certain tension in the air, a subtle electricity that neither of us mentioned outright. "I was thinking," he began after a while, his voice quieter than usual, "about what I asked last time, about regret, and about life choices." I felt my chest tighten a little. "Yes," I asked, careful to keep my tone light. He hesitated, then continued, "It made me wonder about you, about what you felt, about the things you've wanted but never had." I looked down at my hands, feeling the warmth of the coffee mug seep into my palms. "I've wanted a lot of things," I admitted softly. "Some I've had, some I haven't. But I don't think life is just about what we missed. It's also about the people we love and the moments we share." He nodded slowly. "Exactly." His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. "And that's why I'm asking you now, because I feel like we can talk about anything, and I want to know more. About you, about us." There it was, the weight behind his words. Not a declaration, not a request, just honesty laid bare. I felt a strange thrill, a mix of apprehension and trust. I realized then that the connection between us had grown beyond casual visits or family niceties. It was something deeper, tender, and real. For hours we spoke, not just about our lives, but about our feelings, our fears, the quiet spaces we'd each occupied for years. Every revelation, every laugh, every pause seemed to draw us closer, bridging the gaps time and distance had imposed. I found myself leaning in naturally, feeling safe, and seen in a way I hadn't anticipated. By the time the evening drew near, the room was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, casting shadows that danced along the walls. We lingered in the living room, not wanting the moment to end, not ready to leave the intimacy we'd created. He reached over, gently touching my hand again. The contact was light, fleeting, yet it carried the weight of unspoken understanding. "I didn't expect this," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not from anyone, but certainly not from you." "Neither did I admitted. "And yet, here we are." There was a pause, filled with a quiet respect for the bond we'd discovered. No pressure, no assumptions, just two people meeting each other fully, without pretense. It was one of the most vulnerable, unexpected, and beautiful experiences of my life. As I left his apartment that night, the world seemed different, warmer, more expansive, full of possibility. I realized that life didn't always hand us what we expected, but sometimes the surprises were exactly what we needed to grow, to reconnect with ourselves, and to understand the depth of human connection. And in my heart, I knew this was only the beginning. The days after that second visit passed in a haze of reflection. I found myself remembering every detail: The way Jason's eyes softened when he laughed, the gentle brush of his hand, the quiet honesty that had filled the room like sunlight through a window. I kept asking myself what it all meant, not in a judgmental way, but with the quiet curiosity of someone discovering something profoundly human about themselves and about him. When I arrived at his apartment the following weekend, there was a sense of anticipation neither of us tried to hide. The weather had shifted again. A cool wind whispered through the trees outside, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The city felt quieter, almost private, as though it too respected the intimacy of the moment. Jason greeted me with that same familiar warmth, but this time there was an unspoken acknowledgement in his smile. We sat together in the living room, the soft hum of the heater punctuating our silence. I realized that words weren't always necessary. Sometimes, simply being present with someone, allowing them to occupy the same space as you, without artifice, could be enough to communicate everything that mattered. "I've been thinking about us," he said after a while, his voice low and careful. Not in a romantic way, not in a way that makes things complicated, but in a way that feels important, like we've discovered something real, something rare. I nodded slowly, understanding exactly what he meant. "Yes," I said softly. "It's like we found a place where we can be completely honest without fear. And that's priceless." The conversation drifted naturally, touching on our pasts, our regrets, our dreams. Every revelation seemed to deepen the connection between us, yet there was a mutual respect underpinning it all. We weren't pushing boundaries recklessly. We were exploring emotions that had long been dormant, trusting each other with our vulnerabilities. Later, we moved to the kitchen to prepare a light dinner together. The familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and tasting sauces filled the apartment with warmth. As we worked side by side, our hands occasionally brushed, but now there was no uncertainty in the gesture, only a quiet acknowledgement of closeness, an unspoken bond. When we finally sat down to eat, Jason reached across the table, taking my hand in his once more. It was a simple touch, but it carried a depth of meaning I hadn't expected. It was gratitude, understanding, and connection all at once. "I'm glad you came today," he said quietly. "Every time we talk, I feel like I learned something new. Not just about you, but about myself." I smiled, feeling the same truth reflected back at me. I feel the same way. It's rare to feel this understood, this seen. As the evening wound down, I realized that the experience wasn't about him or me individually. It was about the space we had created together. A space of honesty, trust, and empathy. And in that space, I discovered something profoundly liberating, that emotional intimacy could exist in many forms, and that connection was as vital as any achievement, any milestone, or any conventional measure of a life well lived. When I finally left his apartment, the air was crisp and clear. I walked to my car slowly, savoring the quiet. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, and I felt a calmness I hadn't felt in years. Our bond had shifted something inside me. It had reminded me that growth, understanding, and connection could happen at any stage of life, often when we least expect it. As I drove home, I smiled to myself, thinking of Jason's thoughtful eyes, his careful words, and the subtle warmth that had marked our afternoons together. Life had surprised me again, but this time it had been a gift. A reminder that the heart has endless capacity for connection, for discovery, and for the quiet joy of being truly seen by another human being. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, deeply at peace.